Hello and welcome to Offend Not, Despise Not, and Hinder Not. Pastor Jason Robbins with my wife Olga from Second Baptist Church in North Stonington. And we are continuing from what we talked about in our previous two podcasts, where we were focusing on what it means to not offend children. And we've done a few podcasts now where we've been setting the foundation and working towards the title, which I just said, offend, despise, and hinder, and not doing each one of those. And so we just finished the first one, offend not. Today, we're going to look at what it means, and we'll see how far into it we get, what it means to not despise children. And we have been using Matthew 18 as our proof text, and we're going to start there again. I'm going to read beginning from verse 1, but I'm actually going to read all the way through verse 14. Because that is the portion that particularly addresses the the despise not that we're going to be talking about today. So Matthew chapter 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hellfire." So Jesus is being pretty clear that offending children, leading them into the wrong paths is something to be avoided at all costs. Verse 10, "Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? And if he should find it, assuredly, I say to you, he rejoices more over that sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish." So in verse 10, he says, "Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones, because their angels always see the face of my Father in heaven." So let's start off by considering, what does it mean to despise? Just in general, what does it mean to despise someone or something, right? What kind of synonyms might we use to carry a similar meaning to despise?
To despise someone, I think, is to think less of them than they are, to dismiss them, to not consider them of value, right? All that would be
disregard them or ignore them, right? So that's what it means to despise, is kind of push them away or hold them off. And I think we recognize, generally speaking, that is not a way that we should relate and interact with one another. But part of the purpose of the series of podcasts is to help us to see that we do sometimes treat children in ways that we would not treat others. And when we do that, we are disregarding their personhood. So, Olga, let me ask you this first. What are common ways that we may despise the personhood of children without even knowing it? Like maybe things that we do because it's sort of acceptable in our culture, or it's a common way which we relate, that we might not even be aware of.
Well, things that we might not be aware of. Maybe if an adult speaks about the child in third person, right, with the child there, either being very critical or making excuses for the child, right? It's despising the presence, right? We shouldn't talk about anybody in third person. We wouldn't do this to an adult. Or I can also think of just treating a child with disrespect, right? The way that sometimes I've seen adults speak to children in short, commanding sentences, right? Get over here, sit, be quiet, right? Just the way that we wouldn't talk to anybody that we value, just treating them as an inconvenience. And I think it's actually kind of interesting how our culture has elevated women's rights, and we talk about how a woman can be anything she wants to be, but almost treated the role of motherhood in a dismissive way. And I think what resulted from that is that a lot of women, young women, may feel that the child is a stumbling block, let's say, to a career or some goal. And we disregard childhood in that way. Sometimes as a culture, the child is seen as someone to be worked around, right? It's like something that's in the roadway of your life that you have to navigate around or avoid. And I think that this is ultimate despising, right? Treating the life of a child as an inconvenience to some higher goal, disregarding that every child that is given to us as parents is in fact part of who we become, right? Because I feel like with each child that the mother has, that mother changes and expands and can grow into capacity for love, for creativity, for perseverance, for all sorts of things. But despising the child is that feeling of like, oh, well, what am I going to do about you? Right? So that's despising, definitely.
What about kind of the intellect or the capacity of children for understanding things? What are ways that we may despise that or not value that as we should?
Well, there are so many things. One of them we mentioned, I think, on one of the previous episodes, is when adults dismiss the questions of children as unimportant or even stupid, right? Or excessive. When children learn by asking questions, that's how their mind acquires information about the world and understanding about the world. Another way of despising the child is that we either act like they're not there in having conversations. Let's say the parents are having an argument and then the child hears it, and the child may be fearful that something bad is going on at the household. And maybe later the parents have made peace with each other, but the child has already been sent away. The child doesn't know that peace has been reached. So I think that to not despise a child includes that if there was a public conflict of some sort, there has to be public reconciliation and acknowledgement to the child that, yeah, what we did was making you unsafe and uncomfortable, and we are sorry to each other and to you. Another way is sometimes sharing information that is maybe like adult information, something that the child is not developmentally ready for, or not censoring what goes on in the home in terms of media, because sometimes children get exposed. So exposure to things that are not appropriate, not safe, not good.
And to that would fall into the category of offending not, also in a sense, right? Because by giving them, and what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm understanding, listeners are understanding the way that we're defining these different terms, right?
They overlap.
So they absolutely, right? So offending, so when we intentionally or neglectfully expose them to something that would be harmful, or let's even say impure, and definitely, even it could be something that's just obviously age inappropriate, then we are giving them, it's like giving somebody the command to build without giving them the tools or the map to know how to be able to do it.
Right. Well, and
then you
sometimes,
either get overwhelmed or you get discouraged.
Right. Well, and I think sometimes adults just think, oh, he's too young to understand. Oh, she's not listening. She's just there playing quietly in the corner. The kids always listen. They always know what's going on. So I think that kind of despising, like treating someone like they're not there, right? That's definitely despising, right? It's just like, I don't even see you. I think that your intellectual capacity, you're not capable of understanding what we're talking about. So all of that, so despising, yes, it's just disregard, disrespect. Also, Jesus speaks about not despising children and inviting them into the kingdom of God. So I think we mentioned that the spiritual capacity of the child is strong. And so if an adult treats the child with that respect, you have the ability to come to God. You can pray for me, right? You can pray for anything, and trusting the faith of children and trusting that maybe they're naive seemingly to us faith. Actually, Jesus used it as an example to adults. So there are many different ways in which we're not to despise, but these are definitely some of the ones that come to mind.
So we're modeling for them, whether it's in the spiritual aspect or otherwise, but modeling that for them with the idea that if they're willing to then exercise those things on their own, that they have, God gives them the ability to be able to lead to do that themselves at 5, at 7, at 10.
Right. Well, children are not human beings waiting to hatch one day. Like, they already full human beings, and that's what the whole idea of personhood is about, right? So they are mature, they're still developing, right? There are different developmental milestones, but treating anyone as a whole person in terms of respecting their personhood, respecting their life, right? So that is so very important. I can think of many different ways that children can be despised, and just thinking about even mistakes that we made as parents when our kids were little. And then when they get older, they still remember and they say, this is how I remember that. And I think it's important as an adult, when an older child confronts you with a memory of something, saying, well, that's not how it happened, right? Because that's not how we remember it. That's not what I meant back then. But to say, I am sorry you have that memory, right? That wasn't my intention. I am so sorry. Because sometimes children can carry something for a very long time. And if I may speak of something that one of our children just shared recently, was that someone, when he was little, said, every time your heart beats, it's Jesus knocking on the door of your heart and you need to let him in. So he said, as a little boy, I thought that I wasn't saved because I kept saying, Jesus, come into my heart, save me, be in my life. But my heart kept beating. And I thought, I'm sure there was a well-mentioned adult who said that. I don't think it was either one of us. But sometimes adults disregard how children hear that, how very literal they are, right? And even something like that, he said he lived with some sense of fear for a while, right? And just it sounds so like simple, right? But to the child, that that is real, right? That is very real. Or I can think of another story from one of our children when they were younger. We had a friend who was not a Christian that we played with. And at some point, one of our daughters said she didn't really want to play with her anymore. And I said, why? And she said, well, it came down to that there was a Sunday school teacher who placed this missionary guilt on the child and said that every non-Christian that you know is going to hell, and it's your job to get them saved. So the 6 or 7-year-old was carrying this burden of feeling that if that friend of hers does not know the Lord, then it is on her to get her saved. And she would rather not interact with her at all than carry that burden. But unpacking that and figuring out, not just making a child do something, but to say, why do you feel this way? And sitting down to listen. I think all that is part of not despising, because sometimes adults plant these seeds that grow into fear or self-doubt or misconception of God, right? And selling that and saying, oh no, whoever told you that, they meant well, but it is not true, right? You don't have to carry that. That's too big of a burden for you to carry.
Right.
Or another one I can think about, I know that frequently when parents split up or divorce, frequently a young child feels like it was their fault. If only they could behave better, mom and dad would not fight, right? And frequently it's not until older ages, or even sometimes people have to go to counseling, when that gets excavated and dealt with. And I think it's so important to assure a child that what is going on in the home, you only are responsible for yourself. You're not responsible for the adults in your life. And I think that not addressing those things, it's all despising the children's mental capacity and their understanding.
Yeah. So, I mean, without being too repetitive, but I think in different contexts, it's important to see how this can play out. Really, what we're recognizing is that what we say to children is just as important as what we would say to peers or to coworkers or to other adults, and not thinking, well, just because it's a child, there's a little bit more leeway to be lax in the impact of what I'm saying. So just a couple of other things, if you just want to, you don't have to comment on these, but if you're thinking, right, the couple of thoughts that I had about other ways in which we can despise. And actually we were talking about something recently in our own lives where our children were bringing this up to us, either times of life when there's a major crisis, like maybe there's a loved one who dies, or making a major decision, right? And so as parents, we're considering what's the age appropriate way, what's the timing, how do we discuss these things with children? We don't want to hide the truth from them, but it's important to recognize that we do need to communicate and not just say that a loved one moved away or they've gone away.
When they die.
But when they die,
right.
And I think it's absolutely helpful. I mean, we know that if you have a faith, if you recognize that there is an eternity, that gives you a footing upon which to have those kind of conversations in a more secure grounding with children. So
right, but children are resilient, and God made them to understand things. So I think that when we use kind of very childish or cartoonish almost way of speaking about things, I think that there is an age appropriate way of speaking, but I think that we should never hide the truth from children. Or it's important to be truthful and to be honest. And or sometimes, let's say if the family prayed for something, let's say you're praying for a loved one who is very ill to get better, and then that loved one dies, right? And not trying to make excuses for God somehow, right? Or use words like, oh, that must have been God's plan, right? It's just like, sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know why that happened, right? I'm also confused. We don't understand everything about God ourselves, and to be okay with not fully knowing, but trusting God as the good father and as the giver of life and as the giver of good gifts and as someone who ultimately loves me and loves that child. I think that's where we should pause and not trying to give some trite explanations for things that are hard for ourselves.
So that actually makes me think of another way in which we can despise children, because we might try to do this as adults, but people would recognize this as a character flaw. But with children, we wouldn't want to appear like we have all the answers, right? I think sometimes as adults, we can be afraid that if we don't seem to have all the answers, then we're going to be disappointing our children, or we're going to be letting them down. But it's good. Part of not despising would be, like you just said, acknowledging that there are things that we don't understand. There are ways that we have to trust God's goodness and God's providence that I can't explain to you because I'm not God, but recognizing.
Absolutely.
So I think that's good, because then that gives them the freedom to be able to interact with God about it themselves. Right. Without having to think, oh, but that's different than what my mom or my dad or my grandmother
We're
told
not
me.
the guardians of all truth. And as a matter of fact, I think trusting that these children may outgrow us. I mean, we already have one child who understands music theory way better than either one of us ever will, and one child who wanted to do a paper on Einstein's theory of relativity because she finds it to be the most interesting thing. And I feel like you have outgrown me in knowledge, right? Of this like human knowledge.
Yes.
So it is okay. This is what I prepared you for. I want you to become more than I am. And in that, I do not despise you. I invite you into this life, which is good and big, and God is so big and good in it.
Yep. And I got one more thing, and then we'll wrap this up and we'll continue this in the next podcast. But the last point that I wanted to make here about despising is that consider when children express things that make them uncomfortable, right? If a child says, makes me uncomfortable, or I'm not sure about this, right? That means that we might want to, it means that we should at least consider that adjustments or preparation prior to something might need to be made, right? And not just saying, oh, you're a child, like deal with it, or because you're uncomfortable with it, it's not important.
Maybe we should go more into that on the next podcast. But yes, absolutely, especially if it has to do with sense of physical, maybe feeling a little unsafe or uncomfortable. Let's say there is some neighbor or a distant relative who every time she comes, she smothers that child with kisses, or that person who just embraces them in the bear hug. I think it is okay to teach the child how to politely and respectfully say if they're really not comfortable with that, because sometimes adults say, no, you go kiss her. And it's just like, what if I don't, right? How do we navigate that? Or go play with this child because I'm friends with that child's mother. Well, that child beats me up, right? You go play with him, be a good host. As adults, we do these things. But if somebody did that to me, forcing me into hanging out with someone I really dislike, what would it feel like? So let's maybe go deeper into that, because that's a difficult conversation.
Well, because that can lead to difficult conversations if we're doing that as well. Yeah. Okay. So we'll come back to that. But this is going to be my hook for the next podcast. So we've been talking about despising. So based upon what we've been talking about, disregarding, devaluing, ignoring, would the opposite of disregarding the child, or kind of setting everything aside, would the opposite of that be placing everything about the child first? Because that doesn't necessarily seem like it would be the right way to relate to children either. So if that's not, what would you say is the opposite of despising the child?
Well, maybe this should be a hook for the next podcast.
Yes, exactly.
The opposite of despising would be blessing children.
All right. And on that note, we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.